When you're running a toy company, sometimes you have to take risks. In order to sell more merchandise, you need to offer a product with a fresh, appealing look, especially if it is for a popular franchise. This needs to be done in such a way that you make a better first impression than the competition from the moment the potential customer sees your product on the shelf. But sometimes when you take a risk, it might blow up in your face in an unexpected way. Enter Equestria Girls, Hasbro's sub-franchise within My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. In order to keep up with Mattel's Monster High toy line, a line of iconic Monster Girl dolls attending high school, Hasbro decided to give My Little Pony a new toy line with a similar premise. As I said in the prologue, the adult fanbase flipped their collective lid about this. But that didn't matter to Hasbro, as the bronies were not the targeted demographic to begin with. They wanted to take the risk, appeal to the intended demographic, and use the film in order to explain the context of their dolls. Does this marketing tactic work? Can the film stand up on its own without the dolls? Or does Equestria Girls fail as both a commercial and a movie? Well, let's find out. We begin this film in Equestria's Crystal Kingdom, where Twilight and the rest of the main six, as they're called, have been summoned for Twilight Sparkle's first ever Princess Summit, as she just became an Alicorn princess in the previous season's finale. And no sooner do they step inside the castle than their glorious leader, Princess Celestia, sends them off to bed. How compelling. We do have a brief moment of character development for Twilight, as she is worried about being a leader. Her anxieties are wreaking havoc on her mind, but her faithful companion, the baby dragon Spike, is there to keep her calm. Until a unicorn thief sneaks past Equestria's always inept security forces in the dead of night to steal Twilight's crown/Deus Ex Machina device, element of harmony. Before Twilight does anything smart like, I don't know, levitate the crown out of the thief's bag, both it and the thief disappear through a mirror a la Through the Looking Glass style. Actually, that would be cool. Screw Equestria Girls, give me that Alice in Wonderland crossover. No, we don't get that. Instead, we get a story from Celestia about a former student of hers who was basically the most selfish mare the princess had ever undertaken. This would later be expanded upon in IDW's The Fall of Sunset Shimmer, an 8-page comic which basically shows how Sunset became obsessed with power and how she came to learn about the mirror's powers. What are the mirror's powers? Well, apparently once every 30 moons, or approximately 119 days/2.5 years, the mirror grants access to an alternate world, and now Sunset has taken a magical item from Equestria into it. This does raise a question for me, and do feel free to correct me if I am wrong, but wouldn't the crown not work since Sunset now has it? We know the elements don't work without their designated owner thanks to part 2 of The Return to Harmony, where Spike was the new Rainbow Dash due to circumstances. So where's the harm in Sunset having the crown? Oh, right, without the element of magic, the world is basically doomed. Right, I gotcha. Regardless, Twilight must retrieve her crown. Alone. Why alone? Well, Celestia says something about maintaining the balance between the two worlds, but I think we'll know the real reasons soon enough. So, Twilight takes a leap of faith and jumps into the mirror alone. Until Spike proves he's much more loyal to his friend than the elements and jumps in after her. Way to be upstaged by the comedy relief, ladies. And it is here where the marketing truly begins, as the alternate world is the human world, where Twilight has been transformed into a human, while Spike turns into a dog. I would make a joke about asking where Twilight's clothes came from, but that is the least of my worries right now. After a slightly humorous scene where Twilight has to learn how to walk like a human, we discover that the mirror has led her to a high school where every student is a human version of a character from Equestria. Trixie, Vinyl Scratch, the Cutie Mark Crusaders, even that out-of-place guard from the Crystal Castle. Oh, I'd never mentioned him? Well, allow me to rectify that. Ladies and gents, this blue-haired rock star is Flash Sentry, or as the butthurt side of the Brony fandom likes to call him, the Waifu Stealer. Yeah, when people heard this film would feature a love interest, the really dedicated fans went berserk, and have thus labeled Flash as their equivalent to the Antichrist. In all honesty, I just feel bad for the character. Because while his role is partially dedicated to creating a love interest between him and Twilight, he does have other functions within the film. For example, from the moment they met, he has obviously been the nicest guy in the room, picking Twilight up after she is all but trampled by his classmates. After a brief introduction to Flash, we get to our first song, which is pretty bland. Remember when Nostalgia Critic did those Disney-cember reviews and he reviewed Brother Bear? He pointed out that songs which explain what is going on and what we should feel detract from the movie. And I feel that applies to not only this song, but at least 3 others. The one exception being that earworm that is the cafeteria song. How much more effective would this scene where Twilight is studying humans through observation be if there were no lyrics to the song, just music? Mercifully, the song is short, and we get to see Sunset Shimmer in human form, harassing a human version of Fluttershy. After Twilight stands up to Sunset, and neither of the equine invaders recognize one another, Fluttershy talks about how she turned in a crown that had appeared behind her earlier that morning to the principal's office. In the office, Principal Celestia, yes, she's here too, tells Twilight that the crown will only be rewarded to the fall formal princess, which Sunset has always been in previous years. The weird thing about this moment is that Princess Celestia doesn't even question where Twilight came from. She just says, "Oh, you're a transfer student," and the matter is never brought up again. Then again, the woman has about the same amount of charisma as a real-life high school principal, so I can't blame her for having a lackluster presence. So now, basically, Twilight has to become prom queen in order to retrieve a magical artifact before the portal to her homeworld closes for the next 2.5 years. Remember that stale plot I mentioned back in the prologue? This is it. This is every high school movie ever, just with My Little Pony characters and literal elements. Don't believe me? Well, let's look through the list. New Girl? Check. Mean Girl with or without goons? Check. Bonus points for Snips and Snails being the goons. New Girl needs to win prom queen title? Check. New Girl needs the help of the most unlikely friends in order to win? Well, I would say check for that last one, but the friends Twilight makes in the human world are exactly the same ones from the pony world. Which begs the question as to why. Why couldn't the main 6 just be anomalous characters with no human counterparts like Sunset apparently is? This would have allowed them to cover more ground and get things done much quicker in my opinion, even if they had as much of a rocky start as Twilight did. Princess Celestia said some brouhaha about some balance that needs to be kept in check, but I'd say it's a little bit late for that now that Sunset has made her move by jumping back and forth through the mirror in the first place. So that reason for the main 6 not jumping through the mirror with Twilight I mentioned we see earlier? There is none. Oddly enough though, there is a moment of creativity showing that the Humane 5, as I call them, used to be friends until certain events transpired. But this moment is thrown out the window almost immediately when everyone discovers that their separation was all part of Sunset's manipulative machinations. This does raise the question of why Sunset separated these girls specifically. Was it just for the lulz? Seriously, what was her plan? Speaking of plans that don't make sense, soon after Twilight teaches the Humane 5 the value of actually communicating like intelligent creatures, Sunset not only tries to embarrass her on YouTube, yeah, it's probably got a different name, but look at it, it's YouTube. She also tries to frame her for destroying the gymnasium where the fall formal would be held. Now, the second plan would have worked if not for a few reasons. Instead of using, I don't know, Photoshop or some form of editing program, Sunset literally cuts out a picture of Twilight and pastes it onto another, as Flash Sentry was quick enough to discover. Also, due to the gym's destruction, the fall formal is moved to the next night, which apparently goes against Sunset's plan even though it's past Twilight's deadline to retrieve the crown and make it home. And finally, when Twilight and company do inevitably repair the gym and get things back on schedule because friendship, Sunset berates her henchmen for doing what she told them to do. So, in the end, destroying the gym was completely pointless. So blah blah blah, Twilight wins the crown, but oh no! Spike is kidnapped by a sledgehammer-wielding Sunset. She attempts to force Twilight to hand over the crown in order to keep the mirror from being destroyed, but Twilight stands her ground, which forces the petty tyrant to snap and initiate a game of keep away until she finally gets her grubby hands on the crown. This somehow causes her to transform into a she-demon, creating a very heavy metaphor about how Sunset is now both a monster inside and out. She turns all the teenagers into mindless slaves and monologues about how she will use them as an army against Equestria. Probably forgetting that Celestia, Luna, Cadence, the 5 other elements, and the Royal Guard are waiting on the other side of the mirror for Twilight. Seriously, even if Sunset had about 300 brainwashed students, they would still be overpowered not only by Alicorn magic, Twilight's friends, and an actual trained army, but also by whatever magical MacGuffins they had with them. Like the Crystal Heart, which both powers and protects the Crystal Kingdom. Not only that, but wouldn't the humans turn into ponies? In which case, wouldn't they have as much trouble acclimating to their new forms as Twilight did back in the beginning? Yeah, they're brainwashed, but they still don't know how to be ponies. Say what you will about Sunset Shimmer, but her first appearance in the franchise seems to be marred by the unfocused schemes she made during her days as a villain. But none of this matters anyway, as the power of Deus Ex Machina saves the day, and the power of friendship overpowers Sunset, erasing her evil. Rather than be dragged back to Equestria to receive a more suitable punishment by Princess Celestia, Twilight makes amends with a suddenly apologetic Sunset and leaves her in the care of the Humane Five, as the former she-demon repairs the school she nearly tore apart in the midst of the chaos. Throw in one last reference to Flash Sentry after Twilight gets back to her own dimension, and we have our film, wrapped in a nice bow of confusion. While it's not as bad as I originally thought it would be, Equestria Girls does have its share of faults. Sunset as a villain, while certainly despicable at times, was nothing more than a one-dimensional villain to me. Like I said, she was just the bad girl of this film. Her plans left nothing to be desired, and were either self-defeating or even nonsensical at times. And her presence both on and off screen did not intrigue me in the slightest. Also, there are quite a few pointless, if not rushed scenes that just make it seem like the film itself was hurried to the point of having lackluster plot elements. The best example of which being the scene where Twilight has to tell her new human friends that she is actually a purple pony princess. Think about how much more powerful this scene would have been if Pinkie wasn't a Deus Ex Machina device. Twilight would have needed to test the bond she had only recently forged with alternate versions of her pony friends. There could have been so much more to this scene.
However, that's not to say that everything in Equestria Girls is terrible.
I mean, with so many sequels and shorts, they have to be doing something right. The overall concept isn't a terrible one, but there were so many moments of creativity that were sadly brushed aside in order to move the plot along much faster than it needed to, not allowing certain elements to be developed or explored. If only Hasbro went all the way and made more risks with this film, rather than primarily focusing on the toy line. Otherwise, this movie could have come out stronger. On the whole, however, this film is honestly quite harmless in spite of its vapid existence. But, as I said, Equestria Girls must have done something right, because only 1 year later, Rainbow Rocks was released. But that is a video for another day. I'd like to take this moment to give a shout out to an analyst on YouTube I've come to enjoy, named Silverquill. Once upon a time, he reviewed Equestria Girls and pretty much came to the same conclusion as myself, but he definitely covered more ground in his video. If you want to hear even more reasons as to why the first Equestria Girls film doesn't really appeal to as many people as its sequels, go check him out. Not only are his videos informative, but they are also quite entertaining. In the meantime though, never stop rambling. This is Rambles and Mumbles of a Nerd, and I thank you very much for watching this episode. After twilight stands up to sunset, and neither of the... After twilight stands up to sunset, and neither of the
I always want to say Equestria because it's so ingrained in my...
vocabulary. After twilight stands up to sunset, and neither of the equine invaders recognize one another, God damn it, I conquer one word and then another. Friggin...